There we go.
That could well be the first time I've seen it come up. You're live.
I know,
On the basis that I am now live, and so are we. Good evening all. First item on our agenda tonight is apologies for absence. I know Councillor Shurer emailed his apologies. He's, I think, at a creative animal meeting tonight. Not sure about Councillor Davis.
I've not heard anything, no.
We accept the apologies of Councillor Shurer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, the next item is representation from an interested party. This is Mr. Yatesman, if I pronounced it correctly, at HGH Consulting, to speak on the planning applications, which I think on this occasion appear first on our agenda. So without further ado, I'm happy to hear from you.
Is there somewhere I'm best off?
If you want to stand here, if you're happy there.
Yeah.
You can pop your laptop on the phone there, yeah.
I better make it nice and big so I can see it still up. Okay, so good evening. I'm told I've got a time limit, but I'm not going to take that long. So
We'll probably be relatively flexible.
Yeah.
no one's got to stop watching that. So Chair and members, good evening. I'm Alfie Yetman. I'm Chartered Town Planner and the agent for the applicant in this case, which is the redevelopment of the Pick Arthey garages. Thanks for the opportunity to address you this evening. This is now, I believe, the third time the proposal's been before you. There was the original submission, and then it's been subsequently revised twice following consultation responses. We note your support, general support for the principle of residential development at the site and the redevelopment of the site generally, including the renovations of the listed building, which is on the corner of the site, quite a prominent building. We've got a later one. As discussed, the principle of high quality family housing is clearly the most appropriate use of the site, and it seems like you agree with that. And obviously we'll have respond to the pressing need of more housing in the area. We're nearing now, after a sort of lengthy process of reaching the determination of the application. So we thought now would be a very good opportunity after the final refinements to the design to discuss your two residual concerns as set out in your most recent consultation response. And that was previously issue with the access, the location of the access, and the impact on the listed building itself, number 1 New Road. So I'll just address the first issue of the access. So the description of the development before you is slightly incorrect now, because the scheme has since been revised at the request of, or through the consultation with conservation officers. There was an issue about the retention of the, there's a very nice stone wall there as existing. So rather than putting a new access route through there, it was determined that we ought to keep the existing access. So the position now is to retain the existing access, and the boundary wall itself will now largely be retained as well. The access is set back some distance now from the boundary, or the junction, sorry, with New Road and Station Road. And it's also, whilst it's close-ish to the War Memorial Recreation Ground, it's possibly, I don't know, 10, 15 metres away from that. It's operated without incident for many years whilst trading as the Pick Arthey garages. The redevelopment itself will lead to a substantial reduction in the number of vehicle movements. When serving the garage, there was estimated to be an average of 120 daily vehicle movements from that access itself, mainly garage servicing and MOTs and things like that. deliveries as well, often quite a few deliveries per day. When in residential use, that access is expected to be reduced in terms of daily movements by around 40%. So there's quite a substantial reduction there. Furthermore, there's the additional benefit in terms of highways movements of the more, should we say, troublesome access of the petrol filling station forecourt itself. And obviously that's due to be removed, and there was estimated to be circa 400 vehicle movements per day using that access, so approximately 200 petrol fill-ups per day on average. We note your previous consultation response suggested an alternative access via Bridgeview, but this has been previously looked at by the design team, but it was discounted for two reasons. Firstly, there's a level distance there which would make it more difficult to meet at grade vehicle entrance, and there's also third-party land ownership issues. It's not adopted highway, so there's an issue of making access onto that route. So that option is discounted. So to summarise on access, it's now proposed to use the existing access. There'll be a significant reduction in vehicle movements for that access, which has operated for many years without issue. And yeah, we think it's the most appropriate solution to serve the site. So to just address the second issue, that's the impact on the listed building. The scheme has been designed in close consultation with conservation and design officers to ensure that it's as acceptable as possible in heritage terms. The location and appearances, there's two semi-detached dwellings on New Road, and the location and appearance of both of those have been subject to quite a bit of conversation, both in terms of their siting generally and their design and detailing. We believe that, what we found is now a satisfactory solution to dealing with those, and fortunately or helpfully, the Principal Conservation Officer has now agreed and confirmed support for the application. In coming to that view, it's important to note that in planning policy terms, the requirement is for there to be an improvement as part of the proposal in heritage terms over the existing situation. Clearly, the proposal involving the demolition of the existing buildings, some of which are physically attached to the listed building, the removal of those are obviously very helpful in terms of improving the setting of the listed building and will help enhance its historic qualities. There was a suggestion, I'm not quite sure, perhaps this can be clarified if it's maintained, an issue with the use of dormer windows on the two semi-detached properties, but that's been sort of identified as part of the local vernacular, and indeed the building opposite on New Road has dormer windows, so a similar approach was adopted there. And finally, you'll appreciate that the scheme in general needs to optimise the delivery of housing on site, not only in response to housing market demand, but it needs to make sure the scheme is viable and overcomes or allows any remedial issues on site and the decommissioning of the garages to fully take place. Reducing the number of units would potentially impact on developer interest. Clearly, this application has been brought forward by the current owners, and they're looking to work with developers to actually build out the site once planning permission has been granted. So the more viable it becomes, the more readily that happens, and the quicker the delivery of the housing occurs. So in conclusion, we believe that the proposal before you meets all the sustainable development principles and objectives set out in planning policy. We believe that the reuse of the existing access on New Road is the most appropriate option and will not lead to any safety issues in the future. Furthermore, we've worked hard to ensure the design of the scheme is appropriate and positively responds to the heritage asset on site and will lead to a high quality, attractive scheme for all future residents. Thank you. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have if you're allowed to ask them.
Councillor Fuller.
So the entrance will be, is it where the gate is at the back?
Yes, that's correct.
That's fine. And this was the second part. Don't worry, I'll come back to the second. I had another point. But oh, conservation officer.
Mhm.
You said you've been in discussion with them. So have they said that they're happy with what
Yes.
your plans are? So they've now come.
They've now confirmed that, yes, the latest scheme has got support of the conservation officer. Yes.
That's
Thank you very much for speaking to us about this. I may have missed it. So where did you get your data for the number of visitations to the pumps each day?
That came from the former, what would you call yourself? Not occupiers, operators, owners. Yes.
Okay.
So perhaps you could elaborate on that, but that's presumably you've got data suggesting how many, on average, how many sales you'd have through the pumps.
The forecourt side is, to be honest, a guessing that at times we have cars queuing along the road, maybe 7 or 8 waiting to get on, and other times there are periods when there's no one there. But judging by the sort of volume of fuel we were selling and the average sort of purchase, that's where we came from. And the big thing there, the entrance to the forecourt was never a problem, but the exit off that corner was always a worry. And so we were, pleased that's been done away with.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Are you local to Arundel?
I live in Huntingdon, so
No.
I'm not
So-
that local.
What are you basing your premise that there is a need of housing in Arundel, considering we have quite a few major developments currently?
Well, it's a national issue, isn't it? It's probably personally, I think it's one of the biggest national issues facing us, and that's, an issue all over. But Arundel's obviously a very desirable place to live, very high house prices, higher than the immediate neighbouring areas. So there is a pressing need for housing to be delivered here.
Affordable housing, maybe, yeah.
Well, yeah, affordable housing, but market housing also frees up the rest of the market, and all housing is welcome as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
And subject to design and quality and all the rest of it, but yeah.
I don't.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That application again in a moment. A couple of formal matters to get through before we get you that. Most of the declarations of interest. So those are the peculiar things.
So I know the family for the 17 Scott Road came to my attention. I didn't know.
The Sherwins.
That's right.
Right, any others?
I think so.
No.
Right, minutes of the meeting that was held on the 3rd of January have been circulated. Present for Councillor Arnold, Councillor Jones and myself, very thin on the ground. I look towards one or other of you perhaps to propose those minutes.
Yeah, I liked them. I proposed them.
I'll second.
Splendid. So I'm both for them as well, so I'll see to that. Give me 1 moment. Just sign my own copies. Right, on to the actual planning applications themselves. If for reasons I'm not entirely clear about. When I was taking the applications off the portal in the order in which I thought they'd been put up there, I ended up with a slightly different order to the order that we got on the agenda, so apologies for that. So in terms of the notes that I've prepared, it's actually listed as the second of those, I think. So, and that brings us on to Longview Road. And in broad terms, looking at the, what I call, hopefully final iteration of the application that's now before us. Clearly, the objections that we had previously made, which were to the siting of the access to the development and the potential impact on the listed building of the two detached properties. The two detached properties remain, and the access remains into New Road. We've heard this evening from Mr. Yateman as to the reasons why the access is as it is. If I understood it correctly, it enables the retention of more of the current wall to the building, to the development site, if I call it that, to be retained. And points out that it's an access that has been well used once the garage was in operation. And points to difficulties which would affect the ability to gain access from Bridgeview. Clearly, it's a matter for councillors to decide whether the difficulties, perhaps even impossibility, of gaining access from Bridgeview makes us any happier about the proposed access. So that's one thing we'll have to address. The second, we may feel somewhat reassured by the fact that the Conservation Officer is now seemingly on board. We had our concerns about the impact of the two semi-detached dwellings fronting New Road, and I suggested that they would be better not being there at all. That, of course, I accept would significantly reduce the size of the residential development from, I call it 8+1 to 6+1, so it's a fairly significant reduction in percentage terms. I totally accept the point that's made that it would reduce the commercial attractiveness of the development. Again, matter for councillors, I suppose, as to whether they are persuaded that in order to make the development viable, it is appropriate to have those houses, notwithstanding our own concerns about the potential impact of those. So those are the issues. Quite frankly, I think we've debated this application round and round and round for several times now. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to go around the table and ask councillors individually whether they would not now oppose the application, or whether on the basis previously put forward, one or other or both, there is still a problem with the application as far as they're concerned. So I'll start with Councillor Fuller, as your furthest.
I'm happy to accept all the changes and approve.
Councillor Arnold.
Unfortunately, I don't think personally there's enough been done there. Sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last bit.
I don't think, Val, that enough's been done to
To meet the objections. That
Yeah,
were
quite,
previously.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Councillor Jones.
I think it's a fair point that the entrance has been used for so I'm hearing many years about incidents, and they're using the same main way in and out. So that does allay, it's a point of fact, isn't it? So perhaps allays any concerns I felt there was with the way in and the way out. And of course, going in through the way that there's obviously the other way through the other housing estate appears to be impossible for important reasons. So I'm glad that's been looked at and an answer's emerged there. I'm not particularly exercised about the dormer windows. Personally, I think looking at the site, the images that have been generated, I think it looks fairly tasteful in all. And yeah, to remove that sort of lay-by pumping way in on and off the road is sort of obviously going to improve the aesthetic, I think, of that way into Oundle. So overall, in a roundabout way, I'm saying I'm satisfied now.
Do you want me to speak now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept this application now. I agree with the points that I've heard from my fellow councillors. I think going back to dormer windows and things, when I'm now trying to look at remember the area, and lots of those tall buildings all around have got dormer windows, so in a way they would be in keeping with the look of that particular area. And I think the other questions have been answered adequately, so I'm happy with it.
Well, you can already see that it's 3-1, whatever I were to say. I would have to say, but mainly on the basis of wishing to remain consistent, that bearing in mind the issues we found with it before, in fact, nothing in a sense has changed so far as those issues are concerned, I would still have a difficulty with it. I accept what he said about the access. I used the garage myself for many years, and I must have driven in and out of those gates on a number of occasions over the years. But it still somewhat worries me. I would have still preferred the access to have been on Bridgeview. I'm sure the levels issue could be resolved, I accept potentially. However, the third-party ownership issue might be much more difficult to resolve. The possible exception of parting with substantial sums of money, which may or may not be viable. But I think in a sense that's the difficulty of the development site, and it's not necessarily one that persuades me that if there was a problem with the access in the first place, it suddenly isn't a problem anymore. And I still think I would have preferred it were the listed building not quite as surrounded, if I can put that sounds rather over-emotive, but surrounded by the new development on either side. However, even though I have those concerns still, it is apparent that the committee no longer does. On that basis, we will inform NNC that we have no objection now to that application. I'm sure that the applicants will be somewhat relieved about that, though clearly we don't have the power of veto in the event. But I think we'll be pleased to see is that the site looks very sad, as it now is. So it would be nice to see it back into some form of proper use. So unless anybody has anybody else to say on that application, we can move on. I suspect, however, gentlemen, you may no longer wish to sit here and listen to the remaining applications, so please feel free to leave, and I'll give you a minute or two to do it whilst just take 5.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
See you, bye-bye.
Good luck with it all. And we'll change the way we build.
See you, take care, bye-bye.
Right, thank you.
It'll look better than it is now, but
What of course is quite interesting is that highways are still not happy, not because of the access, but because of other issues.
So they're not quite over the line yet.
So there may still be issues for them, and we may yet have this application back before us. I actually think it's 4 times already, but you know.
What's the record? Is there a record?
Of how many times something's been
Yeah.
back.
I can't say I've ever kept any statistics, but
That's
my
right on that though.
feeling is that this is one of the higher ones.
But I don't think
But I
it's,
think it's trying to keep pace with Stoke York Road, because I'm quite sure, I think.
No,
it's
Stoke
now
York Road
nudged her.
It's the challenge.
Right, onto something hardly a little
Yeah, that's easy.
simpler, in some respects, which is item number 2, which I think is number 3 on my list. And this is the felling and replacement of a Wellingtonia. And rather unusually for a tree application, I wrote quite a detailed note.
Yeah, unusual.
Obviously it is subject to a TPO because that's why it's here, although it's also within the conservation area. Now I've gone into a bit of a description about the tree, primarily because there's quite a bit of detail in the report which accompanies the application. And what essentially that report says is that damage to the property at number 23 and to the drive of a neighbouring property is, the horticulturist believes, down to what's going on underground, effectively the roots of said tree. And suggests that the only way, in essence, of dealing with that is to remove said tree. I would suspect that there are sort of 2 issues for us in this. One is the tree expert, not unreasonably, makes the point that he's not, as it were, a structural engineer. He can't think of any other reason why these difficulties are there, and so puts it down to the tree. I too am not a structural engineer, and even if I had gone and examined it very, very closely, I wouldn't be able to say what the reasons are. Whether or not some form of structural engineers report ought to have been supplied with this as well, certainly made matters easier, but there isn't one. And the second one, I suppose, is simply this, which is, will the tree officer agree that the only way of dealing with this matter is to remove the tree entirely? So those were my thoughts. I don't know what other councillors may feel in terms of how we respond to this.
is this the tree that has been the subject of discussion previously? People wanting to cut it down and things, because it's very overbearing, isn't it?
It's certainly quite big.
Yeah,
Interestingly enough, they do say in that report that it's 24 metres high, which is pretty darn high.
yeah.
And the author of the report says that because Wellingtonia have been only relatively recently introduced into the country, nobody's entirely sure how tall they'll grow. But the NHBC, quote from the report, not from personal knowledge, reckons that 30 metres for a mature tree might be about right. So they're
We have another one in total to do.
the tree was there before the particular property was.
Yeah.
Which is always something that I factor in. The house came to the tree, not as it were the other way around. It may be that we will simply say that if the conservation officer considers that it's necessary to remove it, and that there really are no other options, and he is satisfied that the damage is down to the tree, then we wouldn't have an objection.
That would be an idea.
I think that's what we should, because it's a difficult one. And we're not the experts, although my view is if it's damaging the house, then you have to do something with the tree. But then at the same, it's a shame to lose.
I would argue with kind of what you said a moment ago, well, if the tree was there first,
Yeah, but it's not the owner's, it's not the current owner's problem. It's being unfair on the current owner, to be honest.
Well, that's why I asked, I think, whether it's the same tree that we've had before us before, because,
If it is, I have to say, I can't say
Yeah.
for certain, I haven't been back through things
I mean,
to
we-
date. Sometimes I look at it and think, yes, I know that this and try and
Councillor
find.
Allen, we've been very firm about it in the past.
So, I
To
mean,
resist it.
It's part of a row of Wellington.
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, as you will see shortly, we're going to look at another one.
yes, we are. Next door.
Precisely the same location.
I mean, I think what you were saying is correct. We've got to rely on the tree officer, who is there to protect the trees anyway.
Yeah.
And if the tree officer feels, who's the expert,
Yes.
that, that the tree has to, whatever it needs to do, then we accept it. Really. It is a bit slightly different to normal, but we're going back to our usual answer. Tree officer.
I mean,
We're not experts.
though the damage will get worse over the years, it's not going to rectify the damage, and then they're not going to be able to uproot the whole thing. They'll be forever a great mound there.
Shame I can't put a thing that says, don't grow here, just keep going on the
Yeah.
side. You know?
Well, no, but then, like I said, the tree was there.
I know, it's not the trees,
Why did exactly?
but at the same time.
But then I guess you don't know.
It is
you know.
damage. I think I'm happy to go with what you said, Joe.
So it's basically these two trees here, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we're talking about,
Yeah,
23 there and 25 there, or it
Yeah.
could be that one.
The other one
and
was
that is the tree, the first one, that we have had, there've been, other people been wanting to chop it down, and we've resisted, but that's not to say that there's since now some
I mean, the other thing,
damage to the building,
And-
maybe it's time has come.
there is a hole in our knowledge, okay?
Yeah.
In the fact that we're saying that the tree officer is reluctant because he's not a structural engineer. So do we have the capability of saying, we would like a structural engineer's report, and then together with the tree officer's report, then we can make an informed judgment? Because we're going in a bit blind, really, because we've got half the story, but not the complete story. And I don't know whether we can.
Well, it's
Suggest
why
these
I
things.
wondered whether in responding to this, we make the point that if the tree officer has doubt as to whether or not the damage is referable to the tree, then there ought to be a structural engineer's report put
Yes.
forward to try and answer that one way or the other.
Yeah.
If the tree officer, with his experience, is able to say, in my opinion, this is the cause, I don't think any of us are going to sit here and say,
No.
we think you're probably wrong. We're
It's a
not,
big
as
tree though, isn't
has
it?
been pointed out, we're not really in a position
Yeah.
to have the qualification to do that.
I feel the structural report, we need to have that,
Yeah, I think that's
Or we can
right.
put
that
that into the
information.
I
response.
think that's right.
because you're
It
not
will
taking
help
proper
us in the
judgment.
Is there
Yeah.
someone on our list
Oh,
who is structural engineer?
It was, well, with this particular application, given that there is a basis which is it's causing damage, well, the first question to answer is, is it?
prove it.
Prove it.
Yeah.
Prove it.
Now, a tree man says he believes that he can see no other explanation. Structural engineer would almost certainly tell us straight away, yes it is or no it isn't. So, as I say, I think if the tree officer himself is sufficiently satisfied the tree is to blame, fair enough. But if the tree officer is uncertain himself,
We need to get support.
then I think
Yeah.
the structural engineer's report has to come before a decision could be made.
And we are adopting this sort of green policy, we're protecting.
Well, it is part of
We're
our
protecting
policy
our
to
trees.
be very critical about
Yeah.
applications to fell a tree.
Exactly.
And there are trees and trees, and this is
I just love that every
a
tree.
significant tree.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Every tree is matched. Which I love.
Does anybody demur from that?
No, I think more information.
I might have to write it that one. Right.
whole lot going on.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, well, that brings us on to 17 Cotter Street Road. That's the one that's on the front of my report.
Okay.
Described as a resubmission of a previous plan to which actually we didn't have any objections in the first place. And arguably, this is a more modest plan. I say it's more modest because there is the omission of previously approved two-storey side extension, which include the carers stairs, the omission of external timber cladding and replacement of further areas of white render, and various fenestration amendments and various internal amendments. This addition of brick returns the entrance door to form a covered bookstore. It does require the removal of a tree and a laurel shrub, but I suspect, in a sense, because they are a fir tree and a laurel shrub, we're probably not going to get too exercised about the loss of those particular trees. There will be more parking on the site in the sense that there is currently one space. They say this will enable there to be 2 spaces quite apart from the garage space. And a turning area. Somewhat surprisingly, NCC Highways say that they don't have an objection because the proposal doesn't demonstrate any intensification or increase in the number of parking spaces required, although actually it's increasing the number of bedrooms on site, but that's their view. But given that we didn't oppose the original plan,
There's no
I
reason.
find it slightly difficult to see why we'd be opposing this one, unless somebody spotted something that hadn't.
No.
No objection?
Not if we've done it before, and it's actually away from the road, so it's not good for that. No problems.
Right, well, this seems to be the week for looking at plans that we've already seen before, but this one's a bit of a fiasco, quite frankly. This is a West Street.
Oh, this is the,
This was before us last month, and we were exercised by it because we frankly didn't understand the plans. And looking at it, I realised that I and others had misunderstood those plans. So if you can get up what is described as the floor plan, which is never a promising start when you're trying to look at things. But when things become a bit clearer. Now,
These
I think what we were
weren't on
talking
here
about-
before, were they?
Sorry?
These weren't on here, these
No.
were submitted late after we complained that they weren't on there.
we were,
That's it.
I think, thinking
Yeah.
that if you were going to subdivide the shop and you were going to alter the shop front, I certainly leapt to an assumption that the front meant the front of the building and that therefore it was probably something to do with that. And we were all a bit perplexed because there was nothing
Yeah.
really to see and we got unhappy. What is now clear is that if you think about the frontage, that actually is, in effect, a wooden gate that leads down a passageway. If you go down the passageway, you go past there. And where they're going to put the shop front, a new shop front in,
oh.
is here,
Oh,
down the passageway.
down the passageway.
Now, I haven't figured this out at all until I looked at it again. Maybe it's because the plans are now clearer, but anyway, that is where it's going to be. So yes, it's a shop front, but it's not on the frontage. So it's somewhat down the road. There is some photographs as well of what it looks like currently. I think it's, I can't remember which is the better one to look at. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So there's the gate. So the other side of that is the frontage to the property.
Yeah.
Here we're coming down, and what we're going to be doing is altering around here. The conservation officer, having looked at it, essentially makes the point, well, yeah, it's going to affect the external fabric of the building, which is either 18th or 19th century, nobody seems to be entirely clear in terms of this bit. But refers us to the National Planning Policy Framework, which I actually put into the report, which broadly speaking makes the issue that if you're doing something to a listed building, you can kind of weigh up the pros and cons. And if the amount of harm to the building is not substantial, and the benefits are, if you like, measurable, then the mere fact that it's a listed building and you're changing it, and maybe causing some detriment to it, doesn't necessarily mean you should be saying no. That's a way of trying to summarise it. Actually, I think my summary is longer than the wording in the thing. But
No, it's not, I read it, yeah. You can do it.
So
You can
the
say-
conservation officer, broadly speaking, is saying, look, it's a bit of a balancing exercise, but it seems relatively clear to me that the conservation officer is not exercised hugely by this. Though presumably either those gates are going to be kept permanently open or something. So we'll be able to look down the passageway and see it. But to be honest, looking at that, there's nothing special about that aspect of the building. And therefore, certainly the issues that I thought I might have with this kind of melted away.
I agree. And it's encouraging a shop where we're losing.
Well,
We've
the
just-
other point
garage,
is this, we've lost one retail unit,
Yeah.
much lamented.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if both these units are taken, we gain a unit in the centre of the town.
Is the front going to be a restaurant or something? Is that still happening or not?
Travel.
Don't think that, I don't think this one's going to be a restaurant.
So the
The
travel-
post office is going to be a restaurant.
Well,
Is this the new
certainly the
travel
interest that
company?
they've spoken to me,
Oh,
it's
it's
the
the
travel, market travel
Yeah,
agent.
well, that'd be nice. I mean, I'm with David. I have no problems with this. It's on the side. In historic England, if there's any issues, they go bonkers. I'm happy to vote for it.
Does anybody have any points to make, concerns to raise, or?
No, I'm just slightly afraid that it could be a thin end of the wedge or a slippery slope or something, and that other people might feel, well, we can really make changes like that, because we've got arguments about windows in West Street as it is.
Yeah, but they're facing the street.
We
Yeah, but
have,
I'm saying that,
These aren't facing the street.
yeah, but that's not the only criteria, is it?
no, because after all, to pick up on that point, we say things about not putting solar panels on roofs that aren't actually even visible, because we have a concern about the impact of
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
integrity of the building.
Well,
So Polly Western roof in the conservation area.
It is a subjective thing, and I think I'd be happy to allow it and then see what happens, to be honest.
Had the conservation officer been saying that,
Yeah.
this would be a real detriment to the building, I
We'd
don't
say
think
no.
we'd have hesitated in backing him up and saying we don't like it. Councillor Arnold.
Just one question, who, so is it the person that owns unit 1 is leasing unit 2? Or-
Short answer is, I have no
No idea.
idea. The application has gone in, the applicant is a company, it's this Grace Cliff Developments Limited. It's not a-
The only reason I ask is basically I was going to wheel out my old friend construction management plan, but it would appear further down from where that photo is, there is quite a lot of space. I'm just more wondering who owns that space, and is it going to be, they're going to be able to have like a skip there? Because it is slap bang in the middle of.
It's certainly in about as central a place virtually as you can get. Yes, if there were sort of skips and things outside, it would
We wouldn't allow them.
visually get.
Well, how would you get it through, I
Really
guess, how would you get it through
problematic.
that little gap?
I think that gateway is actually
It's quite wide.
comparatively
Oh, yeah.
wide. I suspect you could get, maybe not a huge skip, but I think you
Yeah,
could
mini
get,
skip through.
I think you could get a skip.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
car.
the height of those lorries that deliver them though, I don't know whether
Can
you
I
can run those
ask,
through there.
who owns the gates then? I mean, how is where is the boundary, if you like, to the property that we're discussing?
Short answer is,
Yeah,
I
that's,
don't know.
Because it could
It's
be,
not apparent from
they
anything
may
I've
not actually
read.
really have access to that bit of road. We don't know who.
Well, that,
Could be massively complicated in view of what we might be giving permission for.
Oh, it could be very simple.
well, of course, it is technically possible for a person to apply for planning permission for something that they don't actually own.
Absolutely.
Or in terms that would breach the rights of a third party. And it's then for that third party to take appropriate measures to deal with that situation. And if, for example, there was no right of way down there through that gateway, then presumably whoever owned the land over which that passage is could take steps to get an injunction. My guess would be, looking at it, that at the very least, that property has rights of way, not least because there are doors on that side that open out onto that passage.
I mean, that would,
So, I'm assuming that they have
Yeah.
existing rights of way that aren't going to be a problem. But I think in purely planning terms, the issue is what does it do to the appearance, structure of the building?
Nothing.
Where
And
exactly will the window go in terms of that picture, the shop window? Will it,
I-
will that
Unit two.
window?
I think the way it works, looking at it, is that there's a door up at the top end here with a window next to it. If you go back to that plan, there's, I think, the door, and there's the window next to it. So there
That's the new one.
is where the new shop front
So,
comes.
that-
So the
rest of
existing-
that wall is
so
going
that-
to be a window.
That window goes,
Yeah.
and that doorway goes,
Yeah.
and it all becomes
It
part
all
of that.
becomes a window.
And then
It's a different sort of window.
that
Yeah.
area seems to be slightly set back, it
back.
doesn't appear. I mean, it's obvious from the photograph, but from the plan, you don't get the same
yeah.
impression, because it all looks as if it just stretches
I mean,
on
it's a
down.
massive property.
It is.
It obviously runs a long way back.
I'm back to, we have to.
Yeah, I
It's,
think we were taking a bit of
creating a shop,
detail.
we're losing places, we've lost a garage. I mean, I'd like to encourage the central town to be, I mean, I brought my sister, over Christmas. I mean, she's been to Ireland before, but she hadn't been. And although it was closed, she absolutely adored it. I mean, she used to go to Oakham because my other sister's up there. But she just really liked the way and looked and, was just.
It looks like it does, because we've always, as a
Well, we've got a
council,
big job.
worked very hard to make sure
Make
that
sure it's
people
like that, yeah.
don't spoil it.
But it was that she said the quality of the shops and, not too many charity shops.
But in fact, that bit of building, as from what it looks to me, is, it's not an old building, is it? It might
It's
be
not
attached
super
to a
old.
listed building, but it's.
I think the other point about the listing generally is the building is listed on the basis of being part of an important group within the marketplace, not because of the intrinsic merits of that building. If it was stood there on its
Yes,
own, it might not be
yeah,
listed
you're
at all.
saying really what I'm.
Okay.
what I'm saying.
I do like the front though.
And one looks at,
That's not,
Again.
that's excellent.
what I put into the report, the conservation officer
Well, he's given a clue, hasn't he?
from this document, if I can find it, conservation officer states the internal works proposed would have a neutral impact on the building's heritage significance. However, the removal of the section of the external wall to the rear to create a shop front would involve a loss of historic fabric,
Oh, right,
described as likely 19th century masonry and
Yeah.
a cross window, which would cause some harm to the building's significance, although categorised, and this is the key thing, towards the lower end of less than substantial.
Yeah.
And then he makes reference to this paragraph 202 of the National
Certainly
Planning
can.
Policy Framework, which essentially says that in those circumstances, development could be permitted.
we could say something like that the window itself should be constructed very sympathetically
To
with the,
building,
to the building.
the characteristics of the
Yes,
building.
yeah.
Yes, I mean,
Recognising its age.
because it's always difficult to gauge from a line drawing like that what's it actually going
What's
to
it
like in practice. I mean, I think it is significant. We wouldn't necessarily want a 20th straight 21st century looking window
No, you wouldn't.
in the side of that building.
You want it like down there where the old cellar was.
Yeah. And in a way, we're not then giving the go-ahead, really, we're still saying that
Yeah,
we
you've got,
care about the building.
Um,
I'm happy to accept it, but I like the,
Yeah.
I think a good point is made about skips and things and how they're going to manage the waste. And obviously, it would be very bad if there's something just put on near the memorial roundabout, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Buses and it being utter chaos. They'd have to try and find something that can go into that lovely courtyard, but again, it would be a low.
But they won't,
Flat
they'll be in the
deck, right.
marketplace, it'll be chaos.
It
We're
would,
taking
yeah.
spaces up in the marketplace more.
Oh, yes.
That's what normally,
Yeah, so I think,
it's not the first thing to have been done down that.
No, that's right. But my perspective on it generally is that it's a, we have the protection order on the centre of town, but you do apply it subjectively as well. So to each property, and yes, we don't allow solar panels and collie western roofs, but that's because they're collie western roofs. This is a shop front which is almost sort of perpendicular to the high street, and viewable through a small garage door. I think it's not something to be upset about in that regard in terms of the aesthetic. Actually, I think it'd be an improvement on what it is currently. And I'll be happy to see this go through.
totally agree.
They got all that.
right.
Yeah. But waste management.
But yeah, waste management
Yeah.
and
So,
the shop front.
so shop front, we want sympathetic to the style of building and the shop fronts in the vicinity, and of appropriate quality. And we would like some form of construction management plan to be built in by way of condition.
Yeah.
In view of the location of the building to be developed. And talking of market.
I know we've got another one.
oh, wow, yeah.
Flat 136 Marketplace, these are purely internal works. There is, again, a quite lengthy design and access statement from which I have taken information set out in the report. The clue as to who wrote it, well, the design and access statement, the one we've just been looking at, and probably virtually every design and access statement for every significant building in Oundle.
Is this the, not Westwood?
No,
Oh, right.
this one is, this
Stew
is
box, isn't it?
not.
It's one of the stew box.
So.
Oh, right
if you-
round there,
Yeah. Yes, if you look at the location.
yeah.
So this is a flat. It is a grade 2 listed building. It is in the conservation area.
Yeah.
It was described as having been extensively altered internally back in the mid-1990s, about 30 years ago. And the listing describes it not dissimilar to the last building as either 18th or 19th century, and gives a description of its features. And then the design and access statement sets out in some detail the specific internal works that are being proposed, and and there are obviously the plans and such like that go with it. The documentation appears to suggest that what is being altered internally is not anything in terms of sort of historic fabric. That it's all stuff that was probably significantly altered back in the 1990s. It's now 30 years on, and somebody wants to generally uprate and upgrade the building. It looked to me that this would be one of those ones where we would almost certainly be saying, look, as long as the conservation officer is happy, we're not going to be unhappy. There's no external alterations in here at all. It's all internal.
Sort of take the stone walls down and put them up in different places.
Yeah, the walls that are being changed appear to be sort of stucco partition walls and such like. So it's not like you're suddenly losing a nice 18th century wall with, interesting features.
Where that beauty place, isn't it? It's above that.
Yes, it's beneath it.
It's Jericho. But it's not Marketplace. It's down by Jericho, isn't it?
I think it's okay.
Yeah,
It's not, it's not.
It's internals.
There it is, yeah. Needs an update.
So no objection, subject to any country view of the conservation officer.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Which brings us neatly back to the Spurlings and Wellington. Now, the interesting thing about this one, apart from the fact that there is the other application for the neighbouring property, is that what is proposed is to remove certain limbs because the birds sit on them and knock up the guy's patio.
And then we've got the
Now, we have a policy around tree husbandry, which says that we generally don't worry about tree husbandry, but I couldn't stretch my definition of tree husbandry to encompass trying to prevent the birds from making a mess on the patio. And it struck me that potentially the tree officer might have a bit of an issue with this, because it's an important and significant tree, that's why it's got a TPO on it in the first place. And if these things don't have to be done, they probably shouldn't be done. But I'm wondering whether I'm getting this out of perspective, but I was worried and critical about the application field.
and it's what you get when you buy a house under a tree.
seriously,
It
it's
takes us back to the point we were making earlier
It is
about
a
which
major
way they're
thing.
Yeah,
We've got this problem in our back, and it drives my wife nuts. I would be happy to send this to the tree officer and take their advice. If they say no, no. If they say yes, yes. It's
I mean,
not
I think,
taking the tree down, it's taking a few branches down.
yes, I mean, it's not like it is saying Gloucester making a mess, still cut the whole tree out. It is three limbs which you may regard as de minimis and not an issue. But I think I would simply make the point, it's not tree husbandry per se, nobody's suggesting it has to be done in the best interests of the tree. It seems to me it's being done in the best interests of keeping his patio clean.
But
just
it's,
in case this isn't overdone, we ought to refer it back, I think, to
it's a tree
the
officer.
tree officer.
Yeah, I'm not even good.
Just in case they're taking off more than they need.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting to know the research methodology that's gone into identifying those three branches as the branches.
Well, that's part of the tree officer's figure.
yes, I mean, what have they done, sort of put up a
That's a
camera
very
and sort of filmed the birds
No,
over a period of time?
As I have this problem, it becomes a very obvious.
You should be
where the
declaring an
branch-
interest on this one, councillor.
I mean, they'll presumably use other branches.
Well, I'm just
So if
saying,
you're gonna lift- you lift the stick.
Yeah,
I'm just saying I'm aware of the issue, and it's obvious where they're coming from. But I think this is a tree officer thing, and whatever he says, I'll go with. We don't want to get involved.
Do they put pigeon spikes on trees? You know, that'd be better,
Good question.
rather than lots of branches. You just-
Well, it's the small birds as well. It's not just the big ones.
Right.
I mean,
I
it's
think-
lovely having the birds because they come to your bird feeders and we get loads of birds.
Yes.
But they do leave a
I
mess.
have to say, in relation to these
It's very hard.
trees where they are, they were already big trees when the buildings were built. It wasn't like somebody planted
It's not the tree's
something
fault.
and it's run away with
Quite
it.
what I was saying earlier.
No, I sympathise.
Yeah.
But as the tree officer,
I get the feeling that, yes, if the tree officer feels that it is justifiable, we won't have a problem with it. But if he shares our concerns, and whether it is really frankly necessary and in the best interest
Yeah.
of the tree,
the tree stays.
then doubtless,
Well, and
You
it
should
mustn't
say no.
spoil the essential,
We are
Shape
supposed to
of
be in
the
a
tree.
forest, are we not?
mustn't it?
Sorry, don't we live in a forest?
Rockingham,
Yeah, we do.
an ancient forest.
Well, yes, but
It's a fine, it is,
I don't think there's trees
there's
apart.
lots of deer though.
I think we're straying from the point.
Yeah, sorry.
And I think we're clear enough on that, so I'm going to suggest we move on.
Yes.
Moving on actually means moving away from planning
Trees.
applications, trees. Then curiously, one looks down at the decisions, and where is the first decision? 19 Spurlings. I don't know what's going on down there, but everything seems to be.
Yes.
That one, you may recall, we didn't object to, though we had one or two sort of thoughts about the garaging space and so on, but that was granted. We made some points around the shipping, and that too has been granted. We said we'd be okay with the tree works at West Street, provided the tree officer was happy. Clearly he was. And we supported the application to extend the care home, and that has just been granted
Yeah, interesting, that, yeah.
less than a week ago.
And they're in there.
Though, just to diverge for a moment, anybody who's driven on Blackthorn Road in the last few days may have noticed that the former Abbott House
Yes.
site
Yes.
is being reduced
to a
It's a rubble.
point.
There is no extant planning permission to do anything on that site, but that does not prevent works of demolition. So there's nothing wrong with what's going on, but the question that went immediately through my mind is, why is this going on? After all this time, why is it being removed? So
Something's.
this has been on to NNC and will continue to get onto NNC. We just want to make sure that nobody does anything untoward. Not that I'm suggesting that anything will be done untoward, but certainly we don't want anything happening
It's a big building.
inadvertently or otherwise in relation to that site. But I think it's very much a question of watch. You can say watch this space, actually, it might be more accurate to say watch that space, because there is going to be a space on Blackthorn Road where there wasn't one before. So there we are. Anyway, that was an interesting diversion, as indeed was the next item, which related to a planning appeal in respect of a property in West Street. You may remember this one. This was the windows.
Is this the road?
Oh, I remember that.
And we didn't like it, NNC didn't like it, he appealed it, and the inspector didn't like it any more than any of the rest of us. And he's been told no, which I think may give him a problem. But that's,
Is that the one who's got the note in the window?
No,
It's the Kiki's house, it's the old.
yeah, that doesn't,
Upstairs.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
um,
It's so weird, I was actually going to ask about that, what the actual process is.
so the process has effectively reached its end, and the only way that could realistically be challenged would be presumably by some form of judicial review of the inspector's decision, which just isn't going to happen. So,
So
I assume the applicant is going to have to put heads together with the conservation officer and come up with a scheme that the conservation officer is happy with. Dallas of the Conservation Officer was happy with it, in due course, so can we be. For the moment, he can't do what he wanted to do. Which brings us on to advice from a tree officer.
Yes. It's nice
And
to
I
hear.
think we circulated Brian Ogden's suggestion about halfway down his note. My suggestion to the council is that now would be a good time to have this tree felled and removed and replaced with a new tree that may in a short time contribute more positively to the area in general and specifically to the presentation and landscape setting of the church. And he goes on about the possible new tree. Now, it's actually been referred to us as the planning committee, but actually, it's really more of a estates management issue than a planning issue.
But the date is 9th of February,
Yeah.
so you've got 2 days.
When's the next estate?
The next estates is going to be till the
No, so that's perhaps
Fourth.
worth to come to the,
But perhaps
meeting,
we
and
should-
indeed, the date is 2 days away, so, we can't even just say, well, they ought to really be considered by full council.
I'm happy to accept what you're saying.
I'm very pro the service tree.
So am I.
I always look
I
for
think
it when
that's-
I'm looking at hedges or, because that is an English tree.
Yeah, not like
And
these
it's
other
very
ones
nice,
that come
but
in.
it doesn't go
Fancy
too
foreign
big,
trees
it's
come
quite a
in.
restrained sort of tree.
Yes, I mean, it raises the other thing, which is that as a committee, we don't have any spending power. We can't actually
But we
vote
could recommend,
to replace the tree,
we could recommend.
but we could accept the recommendation that the tree be felled,
Yes,
and we could accept the recommendation that it be replaced.
yes.
We could ask the Estates Management Committee to consider the recommendation made by the tree officer as to how it should be replaced, because they have a budget which will enable them to do it. Can't really see another way around it.
No, very happy with that, because we're halfway there. And at least it's a decision.
Yeah, others happy with that?
Just trying to work out which tree it is actually.
It's that one there on the boundary with the vicarage. So
So-
between St Peter's is there and the vicarage is there, so
And I thought there was a road that runs
Yeah.
the vicarage and St Peter's, isn't
a road.
Oh,
so-
I
Yeah.
think.
They,
Oh, that's the school building. Okay, so those are
that's the school
building.
buildings
And
there.
the old vicarage.
No,
they
and
don't-
those the other ones at the bottom.
Here,
they're
yeah.
school buildings.
Yeah.
It's the Gascoignes up here.
Yeah, so that tree.
What I did notice when I was putting the
Yeah, you can get that
application
box,
is
that
they're
box
all the information isn't correct. They're all under the vicarage, 12 New Street. Even these ones up here,
But they're not in the vicarage.
no, they're on the boundary. So I've asked them to change that
Yeah,
detail.
I've already said it, that's it, no.
Yeah.
How are they now? So the trees here, unfortunately it's in shutter, it's just,
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but it's about there.
Yeah.
Because the big, yeah, I get it now. Mr. Parsons, not quite.
So sorry, what's the suggestion? What's going to happen to it?
Well, the suggestion is from the tree officer that essentially this tree has reached the point of no return. It can't be made to be more attractive. It's not actually it won't be safe, but he says it looks a mess now. And whatever you do to it, it's going to continue looking a mess and it will continue to deteriorate and you will continue to have to do things to it. And his suggestion is, look, just face
Knock
it
it down.
get rid of
Okay,
it
you
and replace it with something more suitable.
Okay, I'll see. I'll find that.
And if
We
that's the
have
view of the
got-
tree officer,
Yeah.
he is better placed
I'll see.
than us to make that kind of call, and I think that we should accept his advice. It's something we are consistently invoking in this committee. So when he makes a suggestion to us as an applicant, I think we should probably listen to it.
we have got some trees left over, haven't we, from Queen Elizabeth Jubilee things.
All of them. I don't think
Yeah,
I've planted any.
There we
of
go,
them.
so,
There's a tree.
Although they might be, I can't remember what exactly we got.
They're
There was
not
pots, there were
sort
more shrubby type things, weren't they? But we can have a look. See, the recommended works here are from our report that we have done every 3 years. So this, when it says report states recommended works, this is what the chap who did the general tree survey of all our bits and pieces recommended. He didn't recommend removing it, but obviously Brian's been down and had a look at it because we've applied for these works, and his suggestion is something different.
Okay, I'll go for it.
Well, Ryan says it makes sense to me. Councillor Crooks.
With my communications hat on, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to do with a tree, plant a new tree, make a big fuss of it, and in so doing, communicate to the town that when we come to planning, as to how our relationship with trees in the town, in terms of planning. I think this is because when I joined planning, I didn't think I'd be spending time on trees. And I don't think anybody really outside the planning committee realise how much time we spend on trees.
Yeah.
And it's part of our the green way we're looking at council. I really do feel this is an opportunity that we could use to talk about trees, because we're planting a tree to replace an old tree.
Yeah, I could see the merit in that, I could see the merit in explaining as well.
The mayor
Which
planting
is
a
a
new
council, we can work closely with the tree officer, and it's the
Yeah.
tree officer who's made the suggestion to us.
There's a story here.
Accepting his expertise and all the rest of it. I'm sure, as you say, there's a story that could be written
Yeah.
up in a nice positive light. So I think
I
basically the position is this: we should advise Brian that yes, we accept his advice. We would like to, in effect, seek permission to remove the tree altogether, which he seems to have given the green light to. We'll say that we've taken on board what he says about placement, and we would certainly want to replace it, but that decision will be taken by
a different.
a different committee with the spending budget.
Yes.
Later in the month.
Yeah.
And then if you could liaise with the Estates Management Committee to make sure it's on their agenda with a copy of that report.
And have a note.
You might even be able to get an estimate between now and then of what the cost of one of these trees would be.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'll have to anyway for them to approve it.
exactly, yes.
And make a note to Rebecca about the story for whatever it is.
Okay.
So that brings us to the end of all the items on the agenda per se, unless there are any other relevant matters for the report, such as.
I was going to ask about the windows, wasn't I?
Yeah, beat you to it.
Yeah.
Councillor Fuller. And nothing from myself, so at 9:20, I'll declare the meeting closed.
Thank you very much, Tim and David and Lisa.